All right, so thank you all for joining us this afternoon for the book signing of The Reality of Interpersonal Leadership, A Guide to Leading Authentically, but also more importantly for our panel discussion. So with me, I do have an esteemed group of young women. We're gonna claim the young part. Seasoned. Of some of my fellow Aggies. Yes, we're in Bulldog country, but we brought the Aggies to the Berg. So, thank you. But I wanted to give a little background of why it was important to do this. One, because it's Women's History Month. So I really wanted to make sure we did this in March, and I've been talking about this for probably a couple years now. I wanted to do this and bring everybody together. But with it being March, that's super important too. I wanted to do it with fellow Aggies because everyone, between the electrical engineering or any forms of engineering that we've done, it took us to different paths, and we found different realms of life where we wanted to function. And I thought it was important to share the message because my first book was still not enough minority millennials in the workforce, but that wasn't it. I wanted the positive of it with the second book. But it's not just my stories, the stories of many. So I wanted to delve into those conversations and give everybody an opportunity and a voice to share that. And it's called McNair Lobby because guess what? School of Engineering is what? McNair Hall. And we always used to meet up in the lobby, regardless of what your major was. 9 times out of 10, if people were meeting us, you had to come meet us in McNair Lobby because we live there. So that's kind of the naming convention behind this discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves, and then we're going to get the panel started.
I start. I guess I'm going to be conducting the panel. My name is Akilah Hugine-Elmore. I am currently the UX Research Director for FanDuel Sports. And I think we're supposed to do a fun fact about each of ourselves. But yeah, my fun fact is that I've traveled to all 7 continents. So.
Hi everybody, I'm Christina Caldwell. I'm principal at Caldwell Electrical Collaborative and also an adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. Fun fact is that since I was an Army brat, I lived in Germany and started my elementary school career there. Know a little bit of German. Don't test me.
Hi, my name is Gerrie Dozier. I'm a career and leadership coach and serving mostly people in STEM careers. Fun fact about me, I am named after my dad, and I have one son. Let's see, what else? Fun fact.
I don't know, because mine is going to be dry.
That's the one question I didn't prepare for.
It's on the sheet.
I know, I didn't read it. Oh, okay, fun fact. When I graduated from grad school, I moved to California and we didn't have a place to stay.
Oh.
So you were first class homeless.
Yes, hoteling.
Okay, so Janelle Jordan, I am an author and leadership coach and consultant with Eagle Leadership Consultants, and that stands for Exuding Greatness Only. So shameless plug, pick up your wristbands and stuff in the back. Let's see, fun fact. I feel like, mostly family in here and friends, so I don't really have anything that's going to be super surprising for anybody, but I guess let me shout out my family in the progress. I don't have any kids, but I borrow them and I give them back.
There you go.
So my nieces and nephews, I guess that's a fun fact, right? So I get to do me. But my nieces and nephews are definitely my borrowed kids. Love them to death, treat them like my own. The beauty of it, I give them back to moms. Get to spoil them and do all the fun stuff and try to save on the discipline, but probably I said gets a little bit of the discipline too. So.
All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started with the panel. And so Janelle kind of talked about that each of us went to the best HBCU there is, North Carolina A&T State University.
Right.
I know we'll get a lot of flack here in Bulldog Country, but on a serious note, HBCUs really do make an impact. And so I looked it up, and so it says 40% of all Black members of Congress and Black engineers graduated from an HBCU. So HBCUs do make an impact on everyone's lives. And so I want to kind of start with that question. For each of you, kind of like what impact did attending at HBCU have on you, and how did it shape you becoming a leader?
Well, first, I was blessed to come from a family who the generation before me mostly went to HBCUs, St. Faith State, A&T, Central. I knew better than the other two, and I went to A&T. But the impact was that there's so much in life where you are uncomfortable in a room where you're the minority, right? And you live your whole life into it before college and then after college. So going to a HBCU took one thing off of my plate. I could show up as myself and move into adulthood without this regalia, if you will, of am I enough? Are they judging me? Whoever that they are. It's multitudes of that. We could be here all day talking about that part of it. But going to a HBCU shaped me in a way that I was able to come up in a place that, although everybody looked like me, I was allowed to become myself and an individual, which helped on the leadership path because I was not bogged down with trying to meet an expectation, an invisible one at that, and I could just organically grow into a leader and have those opportunities without obstruction. Going to the HBCU just allowed me to do that without any barrier, and I could become the woman that I wanted to be without having to think about what I needed to present and the way I needed to present.
The fact that anything you want to do, anywhere you want to go, the first block is confidence. You can't go anywhere until you have the confidence in yourself that you can, in fact, do something and follow through on your idea. And so where that name comes from, like when I think back, it really starts from my journey at an HBCU. I was from Cincinnati, Ohio. I was the first in my family to go to attend an HBCU. And the confidence, like even my family, they, once I graduated and everything, they're like the confidence that has been instilled in you simply by going to an institution where everyone is at the top of their game and everyone looks like you. It really makes showing up as yourself just a daily activity. So when you leave the campus and you go into corporate, it's very easy for you to continue down that path. There's no need to not be confident. There's no need to not show up as yourself because that's what you've been doing and that's what you're accustomed to. And I can definitely tell a difference, in people who went to other institutions opposed to those who went to HBCUs. The confidence that we exude just by being around and seeing people like you. You know how Beyonce says, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I think the HBCU experience, it really gives you that leg up that you can't get anywhere else, especially when you're at that time in your life, that pivotal moment between being a kid and becoming an adult. It really helped a lot in that area.
I would say for me, attending the HBCU, the decision was easy. So credit to Orangeburg. We grew up going to South Carolina State College at the time, the games. My grandmother worked up there. That's what we knew is SC State, go Dogs. So when they played other schools in the MEAC, it was A&T and FAMU. So those were the ones that stood out when we would go. And credit to my parents for giving us the exposure. We would also go to Atlanta and see the classics and Charlotte and everything else. It was something about the culture, the atmosphere of being around like-minded people that I just wanted to fellowship with and be a part of. So the decision came, A&T and FAM, and thank you A&T for a full ride. So that made that decision a little bit easier for me to attend. And as the others have stated, it's just people who look like you, but it was also the professors there that made you feel welcome. Those were people who also worked in the corporate fields, and they've experienced these things, and they taught you how to maneuver in the areas where you are indeed the minority, without compromising who you are. They taught you those ideals, and it still that in us. And I remember Professor Hawkins, it was our comp sci professor when we were freshman year, and he worked for IBM, and I thought that was just like the coolest thing ever. Like, this guy really had hands-on experience, and he never compromised who he was, and wanted to make sure that we had those lessons and took that into the workforce, and were well prepared when we graduated. And it might not have been even direct professors who you had, but if you came in contact with them, they saw something in you and they wanted to make sure you took that away. And I would say one other just kind of off the wall experience, being in the McNair lobby. Mark Bloomquist was like the director for the college engineer for like programs and stuff like that. And I was going to prepare myself to come back home, work at Video Warehouse with my sister, work for her, and went Dixie. And it was just being in that lobby and just how I was carrying myself. He allowed me an opportunity to stay there for the summer and take courses, got us a laptop. Like, he taught me how to write companies and ask for things and solicitation letters. So there were other avenues that HBCU experience allowed us to have and prepared us for the real world.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I will add is that I think a common denominator that all you guys talked about is like family and connection. It's like you felt like a family within the HBCU, that you could do things independently, but then you also had a support system that would carry you up, right? So like if you were failing a class or you were getting down, like you had that support system. And then also your professors, right? Like they didn't want you to fail in that piece too. So it was more that family and connection to have that support system when you were in that HBCU. So let's kind of get into leadership, right? So each of you have ascended on the leadership ladder. Kind of talk about like what has helped you ascend to that leadership in your corporate and engineering spaces. What do you feel is the most valuable choices that you made? And then what are some mistakes you made along the way?
Oh, that's fine. Mistakes. Lots of them. So actually going to an HBCU helped me move up into leadership much more quickly. Because I had the confidence, as Gerrie shared, to walk into the space and know that I belonged. That was an energy that surpassed me. I was not, there was not another engineer in my family, so nobody could give me a blueprint. I had nobody to ask. Of course, there are a plethora of engineers that don't look like me, but their experience is so much different than mine that I did not feel very comfortable, naming them my mentor and then taking that as my path. So because I showed up confidently, I was afforded a lot of opportunities to move into management and leadership very young. I did, before I started my practice, I was a partial owner of a firm, a shareholder, one of 17 that owned the firm, and I did not ask as I moved into every level to be there. It was just that I showed up, I worked hard, I was prepared, I was prayerful. I outworked, honestly, my peers. And when you outwork your peers and you see the things that you don't like, I notated those more. So as I moved into different levels of leadership, I decided I wanted to serve by being a leader. So the most valuable part of it is me learning that the servant leader is the most impactful of all of the leaders. So as my team worked harder for me without me asking, they were the people who wanted to learn and understood what the goals were. Mistakes that I made, the only mistake I made is as a young engineer, I was a little bit, those things where it's like, well, that's not my job, right? So I had a small state, it was very small. I was put into my place very quickly, just for life, right? Never walk into a room, and that's also a valuable lesson now, is never walk into a room or a corporate space thinking that something is not your job. You want to know the jobs from the bottom to the top. It makes you invaluable to that company. So that was the biggest mistake that I would think, as I think back of being a younger engineer. But everything else was the journey, and the journey is valuable.
I think for me, moving into leadership was very strategic. So after being an engineer for probably 10 years, I went and got an MBA. And so as I'm about to graduate, I set my sights on, I want a management role, I want a leadership role. And so I went into the job market knowing what I was looking for. I ended up settling, right? I ended up, not a mistake at the time, but it's still not a mistake, but I ended up settling for a high-level engineering role at a company. At that time, I moved to Tesla. I moved to California to work at Tesla. And so, unbeknownst to me, there were no leadership roles available at that time, but because I interviewed, right, when I interviewed, I was already setting the stage that, like, I'm gonna take this engineering job, but I already know what I wanna do. I just went and got this MBA. I'm ready to, elevate my career. And so once you start planting those seeds in people's minds and you show up in the correct way, when the opportunity presents itself, you're the first person on the list. So that's how that worked out for me, and that's how I got my first engineering management position. What I learned and took away from that, which is probably the most valuable lesson in my entire career, and that is what led me down the path to become a career and leadership coach, is understanding your value. Because once you become the manager of the team, you have all these initiatives that you have to complete. And your team, they are feeding up into you to help you accomplish those goals and complete those initiatives. So if you flip that, what I realize is that the people on the team, like the people who, report up into leadership, they don't always know that, right? They're just going about their day-to-day job, completing tasks, checking off things, but they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. And so it's almost impossible to move up into leadership until you start to connect the dots and say, hey, Tom is working on this, which feeds up to this, which feeds up to this. And this, ends up on this bottom line for the company. So that when you go and speak to, whoever you're interviewing with or whoever is presenting the opportunity, when you understand the value of your work, right? I just created a new process, and it ended up, saving the company $25 million and X, Y, Z. You can get whatever you want. When you can articulate that, they're like, whoa, this person gets it, and they're like, we can't pull a fast one over on this person, because they understand exactly what they're doing. So when you're at work, that gives you the authority to say, hey, manager, I think we should deprioritize, these couple tasks that I'm working on, because they don't really feed up into what leadership is looking at or what is driving the bottom line this quarter or, X, Y, Z. So I think it's kind of a shift in how you view work, right? You're not just showing up and, doing what someone told you to do. It's, finding some quiet time in your day and your week and reflecting, the work that I did this week, how did it contribute to what my manager's goals are, what their manager's goals are? It's just, it's a practice that you have to, get accustomed to doing. But I think once you figure that out, sky is literally the limit.
I will say my movement into leadership roles came not because I was looking for it. It was probably a year and some change after I was working. And again, those are those things that people see in you and they pull from you before you can see it yourself. So I was asked to apply for a position and got in that role. And to be clear, we're here for the money, right? So let's not forget that important aspect. So that was a little bit of an encouraging piece for stepping in that position. But also somebody reminded me when I started with a company, I saw how some of the leaders and the managers were, and there were just traits that it didn't resemble, what I stood for necessarily. And I made a comment, and it's the power of the tone, surprisingly, right? So I made the comment, I'm gonna take his job one day. And lo and behold, probably 3 or so years later, I had that job. I was sitting in that seat and manifesting it just because of the work. It wasn't like I was raising my hand, like, look what I'm doing. It's to let the work for you speak for yourself. Like Gerrie said, if I'm saving you $25 million, or you're going to get that in your bank, it's the work that you're doing for the company that's going to stand out. So I didn't necessarily, boast or carry about what I was doing. It was just more so what they saw the work being, and felt like I was in that role. And one thing, well, I needed to be in that role, excuse me. One thing I will say though is generally you're put in positions that you may not be 100% ready for. Because if you were 100% ready, you would already have it, and that's pretty much your ceiling. So when I didn't think I was ready for roles, I absolutely was. So I will put that out there, and you look at our counterparts out there, and for us, we're Black females, and that's one of the challenging things in spaces in the engineering or tech atmosphere of there's not many that look like you. So you need to be prepared and ready to move forward. And in that role, I'm responsible for 200 plus people and trying to set the strategic direction of the organization. So that was probably my ascension into leadership, and how I've learned to lead and grow over that time has changed. I'm definitely not as much of a hothead as I used to be. I still have work to do because sometimes you kind of exerted the energy you were given at the time. But the biggest skill of that is, or I'll say takeaway I've learned is remaining calm in a time where there's chaos and everybody's looking at you to see how you respond. That's probably the most uplifting thing that I can say I've gained over that time. And probably one of the opportunities along the way that I wish I would have done differently, but I know now, is knowing you're enough in the moment. Sometimes you're gonna feel like I'm not ready, just like I thought I wasn't, and it's gonna be times where you're doubting whether you're supposed to be in a certain space. You're there because God told you you're supposed to be in that space, and my faith is so strong that I believe that. So He's gonna put me where I'm supposed to be. So when you're ready, somebody else is gonna tap you. He sends somebody, and if they're not tapping, and you know you deserve it, go get it.
Janelle just said something that light bulb just went off. Bringing that back to the HBCU experience, you said you're being put in places that you may not be ready for. I think one of the biggest things, and none of us mentioned it, but I know we all believe it, that we got from the HBCU experience is this figure it out ability, right? You don't have to have the answers. It's not going to be, a clear-cut path. But if you pick up the skill that whatever situation I put in, I'm going to figure it out. There you go. That's it. That's one of the main skills I think we all probably picked up without even recognizing it or knowing it.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. Like you kind of talked about the skills that kind of like help Black employees ascend, right? It's like being able to figure anything out in any situation. Let's kind of talk about what are those barriers that you feel like Black employees have that prevent them to get into leadership, and like what barriers did you guys face in your path?
Barriers, I think one of the main barriers is that for a lot of us, we are first generation corporate, right? Maybe second if we're lucky. So my personal experience, my dad, he was an electrician for the city, and my mom was a social worker for the county. And so, everyone else pretty much served in some capacity in the local community, right? And so we don't even know what we're stepping into. We don't have anyone to help us interview. We don't have the connections either, right? Some other cultures, their families have been in corporate for hundreds of years. They have so many contacts. If they're looking for a job, their dad knows 5 people they can call off the bat. That's something that we had to cultivate on our own, right? We had to look to the people we went to school with, our professors, and things like that. And I think, when you are a minority, that's one of the biggest hindrances, is that no one really looks like you. And so they're really having to take a chance, right? The people who gave us leadership opportunities, they all took a chance because they didn't even really have another example to say, how do Black women from HBCU show up? Can she handle this responsibility? Is she trustworthy? Is she gonna, go the extra mile? I think that's a really big hindrance, a roadblock that we suffer in that space. And how to overcome it, was that the second part of the question?
Yeah.
How to overcome it? Keep going. Janelle touched on that. A saying that I have with my clients is, it ain't over till you quit. So if you keep going for that next role, if you keep trying to get someone's attention, if you keep trying to set a meeting, you know, so that you can be considered for whatever step it is you want to take in your direction. Keep going until you get your yes. Because either you're asking the wrong question or you're asking the wrong person. And I think, you know, sometimes we internalize that I don't have what I want. It must be that I'm not ready for it, or I don't have what it takes. No, it just means that I haven't met the right person who's going to give me a chance, and I haven't asked them the right question so that they can help me.
Yeah, so I think with one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about was, I think Gigi was saying, like, basically, like, you know, they took a chance, right? But one of the things that I feel is very important is having a sponsor, right? So having someone that's advocating for you. So they're really not taking a chance because they kind of know you, right? Like, they're not going to put themselves out there if they don't know your work. So Carla Harris has a really good TED Talk about finding a person at work that can support you or sponsor you. And so in any position that I had, like, I had someone that was in the room that I wasn't a part of that was speaking on my behalf. Like my sponsors at work, like at work I work with a whole bunch of white men from Ireland, right? So we have like nothing in common, but like my work ethic, they're willing to take chances on me, right? And so they're in conversations that I'm not in. So I think that's one of the things is, you know, making sure that you have a sponsor, like, you know, talk to people outside of work, right? Like, you know, like I said, like they're white men from Ireland. We have nothing in common, but we find something in common, right? Like I've asked them about like something around soccer or beer. That's what they always like to talk about. But finding those connections outside of work too as well can help you ascend. And then one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about, especially for Black people, is like we feel like if we do a really good job, we'll get promoted. But it's not about just being good at your job, it's also exposure. So there's a really good quote that one of our VPs does is about like, you know, having your own brand. And she kind of talks about success is equal to excellence plus exposure. So like you have to be excellent, but you also have to have the exposure. Like if nobody knows you're doing a good job, then you're not gonna ever get promoted. So getting outside of your comfort zone, going and working in like something that like you're not accustomed to doing so people can know what kind of traits and what kind of tools you can bring. So I think that was a piece, is that make sure you have a sponsor and then make sure you're exposing yourself to other people about the good things that you're doing too as well. Anybody else want to talk about barriers? Nope. Okay. All right. So I know we can all relate to this one. So they always talk about being and bringing your full self to work, right? So being your authentic self. And so as Black women, we always have this annotation that we are the angry Black woman, right? So kind of talk about how do you bring your full authentic self to work and then kind of balancing that professionalism and authentic person.
Okay, so bring your authentic self to work. And I talk about authenticity a lot because, hey, I got the dreads, I got the nose rings, I have the color in my hair. This is me. This is my culture. And it was so, you know, everybody's wearing masks. And I had just gotten back from Aruba. So I had the faux locks in my hair at the time. And he came to meet me for our initial meeting. And when he saw me, he was like, huh. So, you know, this is what you get. One, I'm not into code switching, the imposter syndrome, because it's hard to carry that facade of who you aren't. And that's not just in work, that's in life. It's who you are. One, I don't think it's a bad thing if you're a minority and you're articulate, if you have intelligent ideas. But I will tell you, in these rooms, when you say something and the looks that you get back in return of just shock and awe, it's like you just said the most mind-blowing thing and you saw world hunger. Like, they're so shocked that came from you. So, one, they create the space, but I want you to be comfortable with me being comfortable in who I am. So one thing about the authenticity is don't compromise who you are to try to fit in. That's just never been my motive or how I operate. I learn from them. I carry conversations. I find commonalities. as Akilah stated, and what we have in common, but I never try to, switch up to who I am when I step into a room. I bring my air of confidence. I bring my willingness to learn. So one thing, you got to be a little bit vulnerable when you go in those spaces and be open, willing to learn, but also, and I'll say it kind of casually, don't let them play in your face. You know when somebody's coming to insult you or they're coming off, and like I said before, it's a calmness you have to learn and patience along the way. So once before I had stated that it might have been when I was getting my doctorate, what got me through is prayer, purpose, perseverance, and those P's are going to get you through, because that's how I had to learn some of my calm. And I will say, one of the most frustrating things to people is when they're giving you 100% and they're trying to go in and you're just remaining calm. One thing that I'll say about us as women, black women, sometimes and it's not just black women, I'll say women in general, we try to talk from our feelings or our emotions get in the way, and we let that overpower the conversation. But it's a conscious mind and it's a practice, because if I say I did it, it took just one night and I perfected it, no, and I'm still working on it, right? I'm human. But I will say, just maintaining your calm and talking from a place of facts and not feelings. Not letting those feelings interfere in what it is you're trying to convey and what you'll do. Because if somebody's shouting at you at the top of their lungs, they're not listening to you anyway, because one, they're already preparing for their next response, but they're not hearing you. So just bringing your calmness, not compromising who you are, and also being a little bit more vulnerable to learn and be open to other perspectives that people bring.
So I remember that I had an internship between my junior and senior year, and it was in Washington, D.C. So I actually met my first working black engineer. She was part of the department. She had her PE license. So I was super excited I was gonna work with her. But of course, she was the only one in the office. It was me and her. That's it. So I was super excited to work with her. And then she had a friend that was at another company. So before I left the internship, they took me dinner. And the friend had dreads, and the person I worked with, her hair was blown out, the whole how we used to show up, right? And I remember them both telling me, you have to make sure that you look like the person whose hair is blown out, or you're gonna hit a ceiling. And this was a person that had the lock. She was like, I'm just making a choice, but I know that they're not giving me the opportunities and everything because of how I look. So I asked them, well, what are y'all doing about that? I don't understand. My young mind, and I still have energy to fight the fight and all that. Well, what are y'all? This is outrageous. They're like, girl, we just getting a check and go home. So, but it resonated with me. I was like, I'm not going to be quiet about who I am. So when I joined the workforce, I went natural, first of all. That was my first goal. I was like, oh yeah, they're going to get this from. Let me go ahead and get rid of this. But also that was my motivation though, because the women who actually were what you would quote unquote say made it, what took me out to say, this is how you need to behave to move in this space. And that did not sit well with me. Also, as a child, and as my big sisters will tell you, I have a little of an attitude, just very natural. And I had to work on that. But that attitude is what kind of was the fire that was like, no, this is not going to be my everyday. I'm not going to go in here and be sad about who I am and have to wait to get in the car to show up, especially when you spend 80% of your time at work. I'm not going to go a whole career faking it all day, and then this little chunk of time that I have, then I go home and I'm someone else. And I understand the code switch. And the code switch is very specific to, there are ways that you present yourself, but you need to be presenting yourself. And I always thought that was important to show up in that space. So what I did was I made sure that I did that in every room that I walked into. And the valuable part of that was I'm a likable person. So that's what was getting me to be relatable to clients. The clients want to work with who you are. They don't necessarily need the corporate brand. They want the person that they enjoy spending time with because they spend the most time with that person. So what I found was, in showing up as yourself, clients love it. And then all of a sudden they were saying, no, we want Christina to be the property manager. We enjoyed the experience with who she was. She is showing us who she is. And then they were interested. I want to learn more about you and who you are. And it was just a more impactful experience being myself than what I saw my counterparts who were just kind of following some trope in a play to get where they wanted to get corporate.
Yeah, and then I think with that, it's like, I think Janelle, you touched on it about imposter syndrome, but like Gerrie, do you want to kind of talk about like what is imposter syndrome and have you faced that within your career?
Absolutely. I think just to piggyback on the last question, what I was sitting here thinking is that a lot of people think they need to show up to work, you know, in a certain way to be accepted. But company, right? No, they need you and your different ideas and your different perspectives. And guess what? That comes from your background, right? And so I've definitely been in situations where, you know, you're going to get the vacation braids at work. You just are, because, you know, work supports life. But when you know your stuff, you can always show up as a professional version of yourself. You never need to change who you are, but you do need to show up as a professional version of that. And that kind of leads into the imposter syndrome. Commonly, people fall into feeling like they're not good enough, and I really shouldn't be in this job, and nobody knows it because, hey, maybe I grew up on the other side of town, and you know, everybody on my team seems, you know, rich or whatever, and I need to try to fit in. But imposter syndrome is really a lack of confidence in yourself. You're not going to be like everyone else. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop feeling like an imposter, right? I'm here, I'm different. I might not have the exact same qualifications as everybody, or come from the same neighborhoods, or come from the same backgrounds, but I still have value. And when we're sitting in meetings, I'm thinking of things that people maybe from a more affluent background, or people who went to had a different college experience, that thought never crossed their mind. So I think nobody else thought about. That's why you're there. You're not an imposter, because if you weren't there, nobody else would have brought that up. And I think, you know, that's kind of where I help my clients in feeling like an imposter, is how to make your differences work for you. If I'm the only one in the room who went to an HBCU, maybe I have some ideas on, you know, how to pull in urban markets, or how to do things that other people don't know how to do. So.
Can I just want to piggyback on that, because this is actually going to bring me into another question. So a lot of the things you're talking about is diversity of thought, right? So it's like you have different backgrounds, everyone has a different background, and that diversity of thought makes a company better. However, this word diversity and DEI these days is now a negative connotation. So can you guys kind of talk about like how has the whole trend of removing diversity or DE&I programs, how has that impacted like your company, and what do you think overall about like how DE&I is now being more of a negative connotation across the country?
So the interesting thing is that what I have been seeing since it became such a slur, so to speak, DEI, is that my clients are kind of digging in. They're, when my design team in my company, you know, partners with other people to create the design team. When my design team is up for potential roles in projects, I've seen a lot of owners, you know, they'll kind of do this and say, keep showing up. So I've seen, I haven't necessarily felt a negative impact. A lot of people have, over these years, that it was a big deal, as it should be. They are into DEI. They are into the diversity. They understand that it makes them money. They understand that there's this lane that they kind of have a little blind spot for, and that we are valuable and we fill that lane. So I've seen a lot of valuable impact, but also, if I'm being honest, I never felt like I I was the person they were thinking about with diversity. And that is not to say that it's not on the minds of people. It felt more that I still had to work harder to get the things. It was supposed to level the playing field. It leveled the playing field for some of these other minority groups. I didn't necessarily felt like it leveled it for me. I still had to understand my value, learn my value, work a bit harder, show up and be present, have the exposure, all of the things to get what it is that I have accomplished. But again, I haven't yet felt anything negative with the conversation surrounding DEI right now. It's actually been more positive, where people are like, it's still my choice to do what's best for my business. So I won't use the word if that's what's hurting your feelings, but we're still going to show up in that space.
I haven't seen anything negative. I think throughout the course of my career, I've never cared what I look like. And so to me, it's not all that surprising that, now that we're under a new administration, I think maybe it's been a little bit of a flaw for us to expect other cultures to care enough to actually pull us up. I do think that, that's where we come in. Whether they want to give us a DEI initiative or not, we still have a responsibility to pull ourselves up, and then we don't have to worry about, what they're going to do. We cannot control them. They're for their own best interest. So when you think about it, it's like, that's not in their best interest.
Correct.
Why would they want to pull up other cultures, in their opinion, the detriment of their own? So I have not seen anything negative, because I've always leaned on, what do they need to happen? Like, what's in the best interest, of everybody in this situation? And I don't want you to pick me because, right.
Black or
no,
the list of
because
things.
that's not how I show up. And I do think that, it's a little bit of a false sense of positivity. If you get a role like that, I mean, it sounds good, but if you get a role like that, that's when you really feel like an imposter.
Right.
Because I don't know if you have the motivation to go as hard because it's on your name. Right, so I think if you just leave from a space that, I'm standing on business, like, this is Gerrie Dozier, this is not anybody's diverse anything, and I'm bringing value, I haven't had any complexities in that.
Oh, come on, Dr. Jordan.
Yeah.
Akilah tried to hit a hot button.
Trickery.
Yeah. So, let's say, story time. Right? So started a company, and this is kind of when all this conversation around DE&I was going on. So across the wall, I hear this guy talking, and he's like, oh man, Boeing got rid of all their people because of DE&I. They found out they hired them because of DE&I, and that's the only reason they're there, It's like, oh gosh. So part of me, I'm triggered. I'm like, nope, don't turn into the angry black woman. Don't fall into that category. But the other part of me said, hey, I'm going to let HR know, because I'm bringing authenticity into her office, and I let her have it of what I'm about to do. She said, go for a walk. In my walk, I call my sisters, right? Those are the go-tos. And I'm like, man, look, I'm about to get rid of this job. I'm telling them the story, and I'm aggravated because I'm like, well, this is a sense of ignorance of where this place is coming from. And me, I'm like, man, I don't need this job. I'll do that, but I got bills. So I got to pull myself back from that one, right? So talking to them, calming down a bit, I went to go look at the article, because I thought that was just ridiculous for somebody to say a company let everybody go, or all their DE&I hires because they made bad decisions. So I Googled it. So HR came in, gave me a better direction, because that group had issues with those type of conversations at work before. So she said, well, talk to the manager that was my peer, who was also a part of the conversation. So in this conversation across the wall, I can hear the instance of, hey, you don't know who's on this other side, but she tried to clarify it later on that, no, that wasn't the intent of, hey, Janelle's over there. But anyway, in this conversation, said that to me, and I said, well, for not correcting him also, because I'm not a diversity. Granted, I check the box of black and female, I get that. But in the same breath, don't hire me just because I'm black and female. My abilities brought me into this space. It brought me into this room. So I clarified, and you know, she was an electrical engineer, and I told her, I said, you didn't ask me, but I too am an electrical engineer. I was like, so the challenges that you face coming up through, you know, work, and she outlined some of that stuff to me. I said, I too have experienced that. And she tried to correct her person, and he's a white male, and she said, well, he talks loud, he's a little deaf. I said, yep, that's a disability, DE&I. So, you know, I'm gonna fact check you. So again, and I'm talking very calmly, and I can tell probably a bad part of me likes when I feel the sense of nervousness come over, because I got you in the corner now. So I got you on the ropes. So then she said, well, I looked at the article and you know, I saw it. I said, yeah, I too looked up to find, you know, some information. I fact checked. I said, I couldn't find a thing about that. I said, that's not why they let people go. It was a reduction in workforce, yes, because of the administration changes, but not necessarily contrary to what he was saying. So, you know, sometimes we gotta clean them up nicely, you know, and let people know, but it's a bit of ignorance on people's behalf of not really knowing what DE&I is. So it's our burden is on us to educate them. That's our responsibility. So when we hear those conversations, we can pass the information on. And she encouraged the guy to come back and talk to me. I think he was a little nervous, which is fine. But you know, I think is our responsibility to call it out when we hear it and when we see it, and not just say we're just here because we check a box. No, I bring a lot to the table, and it's that confidence that we carry into the room. But that's my experience with DE&I.
Yeah. You know, I had to throw that one in there. But you kind of talked about confidence. You kind of talked about like speaking up for yourself. So let's kind of get into that. For each one of you, you're phenomenal leaders. What are the traits that makes a great leader?
You got it. Go ahead.
So I kind of like all of the leadership style. Well, certain pieces of it, excuse me. I don't like quid pro quo, because it's not a tit for tat type deal. I will probably say the ones that stand out are interpersonal leadership and then situational leadership. But then sometimes with that situational, and it probably falls better, you could say agile. So you fit within the moment. You can't treat everybody who's on your team and who you interact with the same, because you know, your level of aggression with one person may not resonate well with another. It may not motivate them. It could be a turnoff, right? So they're immediately shut down. They're not giving what you need. Some people need that extra push, and you're gonna have to talk to them almost like one of your kids. You know, you see more in them and you see greatness, and I think you have to let them know that. But I would probably say transparency is probably one of the key things that also I take into how I approach leadership. I don't want you to second guess. I'm going to be who I'm going to be. If you want to know the answer to something or you have a question, feel confident. And I always open up that open space. You know, some people say, you know, cliche, yeah, my door is always open, but when you come in their office, they're typing and they're doing 50 other things. No, doors always open. I make myself available, and if I don't, there's a challenge that some leaders face of saying, can you give me a minute? Or not right now. I didn't come to your office to watch you type and do other things when I'm coming to you with a real situation. So active listening, transparency, interpersonal leadership, situational leadership, all those things pour into what makes a great leader, because you have to fit into the person that you're talking to and who you're dealing with.
So for me, I shared that I worked at Tesla, and that was my first window into leadership. And so I was on the Model 3 launch team. And so my team worked 24 hours a day. And these are degreed engineers, right? And so I had to learn very quickly that, servant leadership really became my go-to. If I could make the team feel like I was at their complete disposal, I'm here for you. You're not here to take, sometimes they take direction from me, but I would set the direction. This is what we need to do. And now let's all work together to figure out how we can accomplish it. I think, pulling your team in and not coming from a place of sitting on top of the mountain, that really seemed to work well, because I always used to say, I'm not the leader of this team. I'm just a member on the team, just like you. I have a different job title, different role, responsibility, but I'm on this team with you and we're all working together. And so you kind of humanize yourself, right? And so when I brought up the fact that they were working 24 hours, do you know how hard it is to get, a top student who went to Cornell or whatever to come to work at 3 a.m., and give up their weekend and their Saturday and their holiday? I learned, very quickly that if I'm their servant, you can get them to do anything for you. That's the only way that you can have people, show up for you time and time again. And as a leader, that's what you need. You need people on your team that when the balls get dropped, they're going to pick it up. And it's not only because, I'm saving my job or, for selfish reasons. They're like, I don't want to let Gerrie down.
Right.
Because when I needed to take off or I couldn't make it or something happened, she had my back. And so it's this give and take. I got your back. And so I need you to have mine sometimes. And it makes it a lot easier and, creates flow. Creates flow that, we're all going about the business of the company and you feel like I have a partner in this. I don't just have someone shouting down, what I should do and things like that. So that seemed to work well for me.
I would say everything that these ladies said, but also understanding that humans work for you, right? Business is not personal, but leadership is personal. Your people need to show up as whole people to give the best work for you. So servant leadership was always my style. And again, going back to maybe my natural stance is a little off-putting. I can be rigid, and I know that about myself. And that's another thing. Know about yourself so that you can temper the things that can be off-putting when you're a leader, right? So I made sure I came in with a good attitude. I made sure that I did not leave with emotion. Feelings are fleeting, and I would tell myself that all of the time. So whatever it is that I was feeling, I left in the car. And I came to work, and I served my people. So in the same respect of the open door policy, I never said it like that because that's how I always felt. When they say that in the interview, all of our managers' doors are always open, and then you see them in there and they're grouchy and they're doing something, 1,000 things at one time. It does not add to a welcome space for you to ask a question or to be vulnerable enough to say that you need some help. And that's a barrier as well. So what I did was to make sure my team knew that I was accessible. I started my day by going to each individual and asking what they needed to be successful for that day, or if they needed me to get on somebody for them. What do you need from someone else? What do you need from me? And then let them have an open space. Sometimes they just were in a bad mood, and that's okay too. So I allowed it to be a safe space that they could communicate that. And I will give, again, because I'm a leader who understands humans, I give them a space to have their moment. Or tell them to go take a day, take a walk, something. Because business isn't personal, but my leadership is. And then I got the best version of my people, and they were clear-headed and clear-minded to do the best job. And then we worked in a flow because I allowed that space. So everything these ladies said, but then also understanding that the people who work with and for you are humans. And you start with humanity in leadership, and everything else falls into place.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And then something you kind of touched on was like knowing yourself, right? So one of the things I talk to my team about all the time is like our youngest son, his name is Kal-El, which is Superman. And so I always kind of talk to them about what are your superpowers and what is your kryptonite, right? So make sure whatever your superpowers are, you're getting into that. You're making sure people are exposed and know like, hey, they can depend on you to like be a better leader or be a person too as well. So always working on yourself and becoming your better self too as well. So all really good thoughts. And so to wrap up, let's kind of just talk about like where you guys are and how you got there, right? So Christina, let's talk with you. You have a very successful engineering firm. How did you get on the path to owning your own engineering firm, and what advice would you give people trying to get to that path?
Well, my mother told me very young that I would not listen to anyone, so I should probably have my own business. I worked in the corporate space for almost 2 decades, so let's start there. I understood, again, the generation before me didn't understand corporate. Nobody was very corporate. We're talking military, we're talking educators mostly, servants mostly in federal and government, that type of thing. So when I went into the corporate space, I didn't really have a blueprint, and you know, I love that, Gerrie, you have goals, but I did not have goals. I was just like, let me go on this thing and wait. I actually told a boss that I used to work for, I said, I've been winging this, sir. And he was like, well, you're doing a hell of a job, right? So what I did was I made sure that I was accessible and available and doing a good job, and then these opportunities would come, and I would never say no to the opportunity, because what's the worst that could happen is that it's not a good fit, and then I can move somewhere else. Because I too always had I don't need this job, I'm valuable, I will find another job type of mentality. So I would try it, and then what it eventually did was get me into those ownership rooms, right? And you learn when you get into the small places that it really sometimes is not welcoming to you or built for you, or you don't have the appetite for it. I didn't necessarily have the appetite for the management and the business parts of the places that I was working. Not the people. The people were fine, but the operations, the standards that were in place, the way employees were looked at and dealt with, I didn't have the appetite for that. But I knew that I could be a good leader, and that I could make a space where it didn't have to operate in that way, but I needed to do that as an owner. So I decided, I left my last job, I left it and I said, I'm a licensed PE, which is a brand changes. I can always go back to that if that's what I want to do. But I decided that I wanted to see what I could create so that I could use the skills for leadership, use the discipline that I have to create something that I would run the way that I wanted to run, but then have a space where I could be a mentor, which brought back to me being an adjunct professor. I'm able to be representation for schools, and I work at a PWI, so I am able to be representation to people that look like me in the space where they're the minority, and they're like, wow, I've never seen a woman engineer, or oh, you know, they have that little piece of motivation. My children of color, as I like to call them, always work harder in my classes because there's someone, and I'm good at what I do. But now I get to cultivate operations, the way I do business, the people that I work with, and I can make a space where I can be representative of people who don't look like me in this space, but then also opportunities. You can come work with and for me and learn from me and get mentorship because I'm the captain of this ship.
All right, and then Gerrie, you're a successful leadership coach and mentored many individuals in executive positions. What led you to become a leadership coach, and what advice would you give people trying to go to that path?
So back in 2020, right around the pandemic, and at this point I have like 15 years work experience, right? I've done engineering, I've done engineering management, I've done project management, I've had this crazy resume, and then I get laid off.
That's a fun time. In there too.
And you don't see that coming, right? When your career has just been constantly upward, and then you're like, how can they let me go? I'm like a star. You realize it's not personal at all.
It's not personal.
So I get let go, and I so happen to have just had a child. Like I went on maternity leave, and then basically never went back to work. So that's how that whole. And so I'm sitting at home, and I had just had my son, and I'm just like, motherhood does something to you. I'm like, oh, I can do anything. If they don't want my skill set, let me see, figure out what I want to do next. And so I actually enrolled in for a software development certification because I was like, let me just see what I want to do. I enrolled in this program, and at the end of I think it was a 3-month program, everyone is looking for jobs. And so I started putting my feelers out there, and I'm like one of the first people to get a job. And so months and months later, some of the people in my cohort, they are still looking for jobs. And I'm like, man, I must know something that they don't know. And I started talking to them and like allowing them to, set up calls with me and stuff like that. And it's like, where are you struggling in your job search? And what I realized is that because I had been a manager and I had hired people and I interviewed hundreds of people, I kind of know the cheat code to like saying what they want to hear, not telling any fibs, but but leading the conversation in a manner, that's going to promote you as a top candidate. And so I just kept talking to people and finding gaps in, where the average person, we're not really taught to promote ourselves, right? You go to work, you do a good job, you hope somebody sees it, like Akilah says, like without the exposure though, and a part of exposure is being able to talk about what you've done and help this, the person across the table connect the dots. And so I started coaching on the side and it just took on a life of its own. I think one thing that I'm really grateful that I took away from that experience is that every single job you take, there is a skill there that you need to walk away from, and you need to be able to use that skill for you. So I took all the jobs that I had, and how can I use those skills to help me start my own business? And I think, too often we just rely on having the good job, but sometimes they disappear. And so you got to be able to take those skills and do something, for yourself to think, what is the skill that I'm from this, that if I had to go do something on my own, what are they providing me with? So for those who, really want to step out into a coaching space, any type of coaching, you have to have a teaching spirit. Tutored, in school. I've always tutored. And so if you have a teaching spirit and you're picking up all these skills, from other places and, experiences in your life, then you can share that with others. And, that's what Janelle, almost everybody up here just wrote a book. Yeah. That's what people are doing when they write books. They're just taking their experiences and, how can I share this with other people in a manner that they can actually receive it and do something with it. And that's a valuable skill all on its own.
Yeah. So speaking of books, so Dr. Jordan, you are a leader of many Fortune 500 companies. You have wrote 2 dynamic books. So let's kind of talk about why we're here, right? So what led you on the path, or why did you want to write The Reality of Interpersonal Leadership?
Okay, so I'll backtrack it to the first one. The first one was a rough one. That was still not enough minority millennials in the workforce. That one came from a space of, I'm not in this path alone. I've felt some wrongdoings. I walked away from them, and honestly, writing became therapeutic. And people kind of look at me crazy when I say sometimes I'm not an avid reader, but I got to be in the spirit to read, right? But that was my outlet when I was in a rough space professionally. There were mantras at the end and quotes, and I go by the quotes, a lot. And one of my favorite ones is Ralph Waldo Emerson that says, "Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." So I'm out here trying to leave some trails. All about was my positive space of coming out of that rough spot of wrongdoings, and how to put into perspective the things that we're going through and journal and jot those things down. So with the leadership journal, there were just some I tried to be disciplined during that process. That I was there were leadership things that I saw in other people, and I'm like, oof, I don't want to be that person. Or how, if I am that person, how do I get how do I overcome it? What are the perspectives of others? What am I going to be diligent about this week, in improving myself as a better leader? So part of it is self-check and self-actualization of kind of who you are, where you want to be, and kind of moving forward from that. So that was the motivation for writing the second book, because everybody wants to be a manager, and that's just managing equipment and processes and telling people what to do. But I'm really passionate about being a leader. I want to be, as I said, interpersonal, authentic, and I want to be relatable as I'm conveying things to other people. And I feel like some people don't know the tools. And as Gerrie stated, we talk to people on the side and be helpful. And that's kind of where my for wanting to start my own company came from as well. Well, I'm helping people on the side. Let's see if we can push this a little bit further. How can I spread this message a little bit further to get managers or leaders where you walk in the room and be like, man, like I said earlier about the guy, I'm gonna get his job. I don't want anybody to look at me and say, oh, I'm gonna get that job, but I want to help you get that job. I want to make you a better leader. Right. So that was the intention behind that, the second book, and why we're here today.
All right, so I think that's all the questions that we have. Does anyone have any questions in the audience? Questions? Okay. All right. Okay, well, thank you all again, and then I'll hand over to you for the food.
Well, I just want to say thank you to my panelists for attending. We had people coming from Atlanta and Charlotte. They didn't have to be here, but it felt it not robbery, and I truly appreciate them for doing it. So again, this is a conversation that I wanted to have for a while of bringing like-minded people together, but our experiences are so different in what we've been through and what we've accomplished. So just as a token of appreciation, because it's Women's History Month and we're all about self-care, have some tokens for you all. This handsome young man, thank you. It might be an empty box. Don't get too excited. But again, thank you to all of the panelists, and thank you all for listening in and at least hearing our stories, and hope this will be one of many to come. So with that, we're going to end the